Okay, hey everyone, welcome to ATARC's RPA Working Group webinar titled Methodologies and Best Practices for Successful RPA Implementation. Today, our IT topic experts are going to focus on discussing the best practices and methodologies in order to make the implementation of RPA a little bit easier and more successful. Before we begin, I do want to encourage the audience, if you do have questions, to put them in the Q&A section of this platform, and we'll get to them closer to the end of the webinar. And I'd like to hand it over to Kathleen Walsh, a managing partner and principal analyst for Cognilytica. She'll be moderating for us today. And so Kathleen, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thanks so much, Nicole. And we're so excited to be here. The way that this will work today is that we have about a 30-minute presentation, and then we are going to welcome Timothy Goodwin from USPTO for a fireside chat. We'll ask him some questions about his RPA implementation, and then we will turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So please make sure to type your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom session, and we will get to all of the questions, hopefully at the end. We love Q&A. That's always some of the best parts of presentations. So please definitely ask your questions as they pop into your head. But with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So this is on methodologies and best practices for successful RPA implementation, and also an overview of methodology for doing AI projects right. A little bit about Cognilytica, in case you're not familiar with us. I'm Kathleen Walsh. I'm a managing partner and principal analyst at Cognilytica, and I'm joined by my colleague Ron Schmelzer, who's also a managing partner and principal analyst at Cognilytica. We'll be doing this presentation today. Cognilytica is an AI-focused analyst, advisory, and education firm. We produce market research, advisory, and guidance on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and cognitive technology. We also have role-specific education, but we also focus and advocate for best practices methodologies on artificial intelligence projects, including the CPMAI methodology, cognitive project management for AI, and we'll talk a little bit about that in our presentation today. As mentioned, I'm Kathleen Walsh, and I'm joined by Ron Schmelzer. We also host the very popular AI Today podcast. We've been doing it for 4 years now, so I encourage you to check that out. We interview various thought leaders from both public and private sector on how they are adopting artificial intelligence today. We also have use case series, educational series, so I encourage you to check that out. And we run AI communities as well, including the AI and government community, the data for AI community, machine learning lifecycle community, and others as well. And you may have seen us, we write for both Forbes and TechTarget. You may have seen some of our articles in there. We actually wrote a piece with Timothy that we can share in the links in case you guys did not see that leading up to today's event. So that was very exciting. I encourage you to check that out if you haven't. But with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started with the presentation.
Yes. So hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here on the webinar. And I recognize many of your names on the participant list. So welcome to all of you. Some of you are putting RPA into practice. Some of you are building RPA solutions, are building RPA technology, so that you know that across the ecosystem. And many of you are actually experts, honestly, have been doing RPA for a long time. And I think part of the reason we want to talk about best practices and methodologies is because a lot of times projects tend to get stuck. You start any sort of project, doesn't need to be a cognitive project, could be an analytics project, could be any sort of automation project, and you'll find yourself getting stuck because you'll run into the things that have nothing to do with the technology. A lot of times the technology is usually the easy part, and it's really dealing with people and dealing with these explicit and implicit processes that are usually the issue. Of course, the second word in RPA is process. And so when we think about process automation, many times we are thinking about sort of these explicit processes, which are the processes that we can, think about. We think about the order of operations. We think about specific tasks. We think about, maybe big processes like look to book, from or procure to pay or order to cash or a procurement process or a supply chain process or a hiring process or an IT process. There's so many of those. And to the extent that, we know what we're doing, especially if we're trying to automate some repetitive task, that we can save some significant amount of money by having some automated system doing it, That's great. But a lot of times we get stuck because of the implicit processes. That's the part of the process that is not very well defined, that are often stuck in people's heads, or maybe on paper, or maybe there is no standard. Maybe different people do the same process in a different way, or maybe the exceptions are really the majority of the process. And so a lot of times the problems that we see arise from issues of people, of process, of data, and not really technology related issues.
Exactly. Right. So it's not necessarily the technology, because sometimes that's the easy part to fix. It's all these additional things that need to take place. So, I'm sure that everybody is familiar with attended versus unattended bots when we have RPA projects, but it's important to be able to understand when to use attended versus unattended and really look to your processes and figure out what you're trying to solve. So we've put together this chart that really helps you evaluate the what, the how, the when, and the why to make sure that you're understanding your project and that you are moving forward in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, methodology, that's what it's all about. We want to make sure that you have something that can be repeatable, so that if somebody, if you're out on vacation or you leave that role and somebody else comes in to take that spot, that we have something documented that people can look to. So with this, we break down the what of attended versus unattended, where, with attended bots, we're going to be handling tasks for individual employees, where unattended RPA really automates some of those back office processes at scale. So if you have a lot of processes that, are some of those back office ones, then you're going to want to look for an unattended. The attended is where, I'm just an individual, I'm doing these certain things. I can kick off a process. I'm there, I'm monitoring it the whole time. It doesn't need to run overnight while I'm not there. So that's really the what of it. The how, this is also important because you need to know, okay, how is this going to get triggered? Is an employee going to trigger it directly and then use that bot to carry out an activity? All right, then we're going to want attended. But are we going to be, running this kind of in the background? Like I said, maybe overnight when people aren't there, can't monitor it, doesn't matter. Then we're going to look for unattended. And the when, that's also important. We want to make sure that we're understanding when we want this triggered. Do we want an employee to trigger it every time that they need something? Maybe just as they're doing it. Or do we want bots to be able to complete entire processes or as much of a process as they possibly can without humans needing to be there in the loop monitoring this the entire time? And then also we have the why. Why are we doing this? It's a really important question to ask yourself and make sure that you're using these for the correct thing. Do we want to improve and increase productivity and customer satisfaction, maybe at call centers or service desk environments, for that individual? Or do we want to free employees from doing some of those very rote, repetitive tasks that are low value but need to get done? Or maybe even high value, but they are rote and you can continue to, you can use a bot for that. So when you're looking to figure out, do you want attended versus unattended, you really should be asking yourselves these questions and making sure that you're doing things the right way.
Yeah, and part of the reason why we talk about attended versus unattended is because we think about the kinds of processes that we are trying to automate. And that's what process automation is all about. I'll get into that in the next slide because we'll sort of break it down a little bit further. If you're in the middle of some operation and it takes the person, they need to navigate 5 or 6 different systems to accomplish some sort of task, right? And the use of the bot is to obviously simplify that, to automatically extract information or put information or compile or consist or do some sort of task. Then what you're doing is you're sort of saving that incremental time. And then you have to think about it from an ROI perspective. Okay, well, how many tasks is this person doing a day? Or you think about some of those other metrics, call center volume, turnaround time, customer satisfaction, cost per task, that sort of stuff. But there are many other tasks where something needs to happen, like you need to be processing something, taking invoices. The usual examples, like, emails come in with invoices that are PDF attachments and you need to, it's like not a good task to have a person acting like a robot to go in there, open up the email, download the PDF, extract the information, put it in the system. A human shouldn't be doing that at all, right? That's so that's part of the evaluation for that, is to think about that. And I know we're kind of harping on this. You're like, why are we digging so deep into it? Because this gets to the core of what we are trying to do here. And that's this next slide here. We think about robotic process automation, and I think people kind of get tripped up sometimes on these words, and they do mean something. We think robots, and people start thinking, all of a sudden they start thinking about, crazy robots, C3PO, R2D2, Terminator, whatever comes into their mind of thinking about robots. Although it's ironic, because the 99% of the robots out there aren't like that. They're just doing some repetitive thing, right?
Right.
And then we think about process, and people get tripped up sometimes. They're like, oh, opening up an email and extracting a PDF, that's not a process. That's just a thing I do. I'm like, people, this is part of your task, right? And of course, automation, people think about, what does it mean to automate? So sometimes we break, well, actually many times we break it down. So let's sort of cross out this word robotic for a moment here. If that gets people tripped up and thinking about crazy things, we're going to get into intelligence in a moment. Let's think about this in terms of tasks, right? In terms of the thing, or the repetitive stuff, the things that we are trying to be repetitive. The joke that we always say, or the thing we always say, is if you were walking down the street and someone said, hey, you're acting like a robot, or you look robotic, that's not a compliment. No one's saying, oh, you're intelligent. Robotic, we get to say robotic and intelligent are not synonyms, right? If someone calls you robotic, that means that they're telling you that you're acting in a robotic way, which is repetitive, So we would like to use the word repetitive, but repetitive process automation gets people tripped up. So let's replace the word process with task. I was actually saying it earlier. Repetitive task automation, you might say, okay, so if I say I need to implement some software to do repetitive task automation, that might start to get you thinking about, what are those repetitive tasks? You might not think, oh, well, downloading email as a PDF, that's not a process, but it is a repetitive task, right? So you can think about it that way. Or like, I'm on the phone call with someone, I'm processing their consideration, and I have to constantly go into 5 or 6 different systems. That's a repetitive task. The word repetitive task might flip people out too. So sometimes a better way of saying it is workflow automation. And that brings about many different ways that we've been trying to do workflow automation for decades. But this being one of the lower friction, part of the reason why RPA has gained traction is because it is lower friction than the other ways that we had tried to do workflow automation in the past, which involved a lot of coding or of in systems integration, things like that.
Right. Right. And so one thing that's, great about RPA is that you don't need to be incredibly technical to use it. You can get, buy-in from many in the organization rather than just a few who are able to do this. But there are some challenges with RPA. You need that human in the loop, because if processes get updated or forms get updated and fields change, the bot can't go in and figure it out for itself that this field has changed, or it looks like it's, pulling from wrong data. Maybe somebody had set this up incorrectly, and now it's going crazy, or that the fields have changed, and so you're entering numbers into a name field, for example. So they can't easily handle process exceptions either. And also, organizations, we always say at Cognilytica, 80+% of an organization's content is unstructured. So that's going to be emails, video files, chat, audio files. I mean, the large majority of data and content at an organization is unstructured. So you need to be able to handle that, and bots can't easily do that. Also, sometimes bots just get stuck on desktop machines. If somebody creates a bot to do a simple task, it can just get stuck on that machine. So in order to really bring RPA to the next level, we need to have intelligence, and we need to make these bots a little bit more intelligent, because as Ron said, the word robotic doesn't necessarily mean intelligence.
Right. So, I mean, on its own, automation by itself is not intelligence, because you can automate all sorts of things. Here we have an interesting little GIF, if you haven't seen this before, of an automatically right swiping on a Tinder app. And then down here, we have a machine that really doesn't do anything but pull itself out of the plug. I mean, those are automations, and you could automate anything, right? But in order to achieve some of these greater levels of capability, we need some cognitive capability, right? It's not just automation. We need to be able to read text. We need to be able to understand changes. And the three key aspects of intelligence, if you do any sort of research on the AI space and you look at machine learning and what people are trying to achieve with machine learning, they're trying to achieve one or more of three things. One, the ability to perceive. That's perceiving the world around you, whether it's recognition systems, conversation systems, finding and discovering patterns. All these things are part of perception. Of course, the next thing is prediction, which is is there a pattern? Can I do predictive analytics? Can I figure out what next to do? Oh my goodness, the process has changed. Can I basically figure out what next to do? And of course, the third aspect is planning, which is determining what to do. Coming up with a goal, with some sort of approach to a problem. The more that systems can do perception, prediction, and planning, the more intelligent they are, and the more they achieve what we are doing as humans. We're spending a lot of our time doing perception, prediction, and planning. So, of course, if the system is rules-based or is programmatic, then it's the human putting in their knowledge and our intelligence into the system, so that if something changes, the human has to go in and make the change, because we're the ones building the rules, right? So what we really want is we want the machines to be able to learn on their own. We want them to be able to figure out where the exceptions are, figure out how the processes are built, figure out how the data is changing over time, how to improve over time, how to basically deal with variability, deal with probability. A big part of AI is probabilistic systems. If you're using the human to do all that sort of stuff, then the system's not intelligent. You are, hopefully, as a human, but the system is automating that. But the more that we can make the system do that, the more we can add intelligence to RPA systems.
Exactly. And so here we have levels of intelligent process automation. And depending on the task that you need, you don't always need intelligence, but it helps, move you along. And so with any level of automation, we always say, it's a journey. So start small, think big, and iterate often. So here we have the 4 levels of automation. And this is really where you're just going to start to continue to apply more artificial intelligence, more machine learning, more of that cognitive technology to these different levels to get them more intelligent. But with anything, you're never going to go from level 0, fully dependent on humans to fully autonomous. That doesn't happen. So make sure that you do understand that and that this is a journey. So at our level 0, this really is just unintelligent automation. Can be incredibly useful. As we said in the last slide, I program my coffee pot every day. It's incredibly useful. I have a nice hot cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning. But if I forget to program it and I forget to put water in, or I forget to put grinds in, it is not going to give me that nice cup of coffee. So with our level 0, which is just that unintelligent automation, this really is just that screen recorder. It's focused on replicating tasks, the humans fully in the loop, fully in control, and managing this entire process. So that's not intelligent. But now at level 1, we're bringing some language and context awareness in. So we can use natural language processing, maybe OCR, which isn't really intelligence, but we can bring that in as well. Also, virtual assistants to help with process development. We can fix and validate data as necessary, which is very important. And also deal with some of that unstructured data that we said, that organizations have a lot of. At level 2, this is really intelligent process awareness. So we're able to automatically identify process flows in new systems. It can do that for itself. We call that process discovery. It can also anticipate and mitigate process flow exceptions. So it can, start anticipating things, start, beginning to figure that out. It can understand UI changes, which is incredibly important. If a field changes, for example, the date field changes and it's now below name where it used to be in front of name before, the system's able to go in and automatically figure that out so that you're not getting stuck in that process. It can fix and find missing data and automatic process documentation as well, which is incredibly important if you need that. At level 3, this is really autonomous process optimization. So this is where we are, really have intelligent bots where they're able to suggest and make modifications to processes, which is important because, we have a lot of bottlenecks. As Ron said earlier, sometimes your process flows are not good. Like they just shouldn't be done that way. So it can come in and suggest and make modifications. It really knows, best ways to move forward because it's been able to look and learn from the system. It can also learn from itself to figure out better ways to handle that process flow, as I said, and then automatic orchestration to multiple bots to optimize processes. Now, like I said, this is a journey. So we do not have level 3 yet, but this is the end goal.
And part of the reason why we say this is we've seen some really great bots. I mean, we have some great examples. I know we've done some use cases. There's actually now several hundred use cases out there for RPA in many different industries, and especially in government. We know that there are folks collecting different case studies. We've seen many. And so there's many great examples of ROI there. But I have to say, we have also seen some pretty crazy RPA bots where we're like, I remember an organization was very proud of the fact that they reduced some time for some process that usually took like an hour or two to take something out of email and to put it in some sort of spreadsheet. And then what it did is then it took that spreadsheet or crunched it together some data and then sent out another email. And they're like, it used to take an hour to basically go from this email to that email. But we're like, what's the purpose of these emails?
We were like, you just automated a really stupid process.
Basically. And they're like, don't ask, that's just the way the process is. And we understand, sometimes, some organization, they want their data sent in a very particular way. But it's kind of funny, you sort of run into that level very quickly, which is like, okay, the technology can solve this task automation problem you're having here, but you have to ask yourself why we're even doing this at all. That's a much harder conversation because it's much harder to change people than it is to change technology. I hopefully get a lot of nodding heads here. So this actually brings us to methodology. And I think methodology to a lot of people seems esoteric or academic or like, okay, what is methodology? And we kind of spent a lot of time saying, well, methodology is just the steps that you take to accomplish some sort of goal, right? It's your method, your process, right? But if you don't want to use the word process, because unfortunately it is a little overloaded. So you want to think, well, it's like your method. When someone says, hey, I need to come in, I have this task to automate, what do? Do you just start programming right away? Or it's like, or even more specifically, if you're trying to build an AI system, which is so dependent on data, as a matter of fact, all of the functionality of machine learning systems are entirely dependent on the data. You can't just go in there and start hacking out machine learning models because you have no idea. Where's the data? How good is it? What's the quality? So you have to follow a set of steps. You have to start with, okay, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Do I have the data that I need to solve that problem? Is the data even in the right format or in the right level of cleanliness? Okay, great. Now what approach do I use to get that data and put it into a model or an automation, if I'm going to do an automation that solves that problem? Then how do I evaluate whether or not it's actually providing a solution to the problem? And then once I say that, how do I get this out into the universe to actually work? Well, you might have that process might exist in your head, but for many people, there's no for a lot of folks don't have this written down anywhere. So you hire somebody new to your team. They have no idea how you're doing it. They will probably do it a different way. You add a new contractor to your project. They might do it a different way. You add a new vendor to your product. They might do it another way. What should take 2 or 3 weeks ends up taking 2 or 3 months or 2 or 3 years, heaven forbid, right? You could solve this problem so easily just by having a method, a written down method. And that's what CPMAI is for AI projects. And it's basically combines a methodology that's been around for over 20 years called CRISP-DM, which is focused on data mining projects. It was a cross-industry, it actually stands for a cross-industry standard process for data mining. And it was developed by SAS and IBM and NEC and all these companies. And it kind of was forgotten about for a while because it was very data centric, but it's made a big resurgence in the form of CPMAI, where people realized, oh, I can bring in Agile. I can use the 7 patterns, which basically helps me figure out what kind of project I'm running, and I basically do these things in iterations. So the answer is, can I have a fully functional AI project in 2 weeks? Yes. Separate to that, can I just have a fully functional RPA project in 2 weeks? Answer is heck yeah, right? As long as you know what problem you're trying to solve, as long as you understand the process and the data requirements, as long as everything has been prepared in the right way, you can get to that income with a high degree of reliability. So I mean, we harp on this a lot, right? We're advocates for good process, good method, right?
Exactly. And we continue to be surprised, maybe we shouldn't be, but we are, at how many people do not have a methodology. So as Ron mentioned, if somebody is new to your team, or if somebody leaves, or if somebody joins the project midway, how do you know what data that you've used? This goes for AI projects and machine learning projects. This also can go for RPA projects. You know, what process are you trying to automate? Where is that data coming from? How are you managing exceptions? How are you adding AI into, you know, and more of that cognitive technology with those levels that we talked about? How are you looking to add that into your bots? Are you not? Are you just doing it ad hoc? A lot more people than you know, we would like to admit are doing things ad hoc, and that's why we advocate for methodologies, specifically CPMAI methodology. We did not present the 7 patterns here, but we have podcasts on this. We have Forbes articles on this. It's really a shortcut for thinking about AI, because when we talk about AI, it's a very umbrella term. And so I may be talking about chatbots, Ron may be talking about autonomous vehicles, someone in the audience may be thinking about a predictive analytics solution. And so with that, you know, it's a way to shortcut and make sure everybody is speaking the same language. So if you're interested in learning more about 7 patterns and CPMAI, we'll make sure that we give you those articles so that you can link to that. And really, methodology separates winners from losers, because we have seen too many projects fail because people have not thought it through fully. And they go and, you know, move forward when they really shouldn't, because they didn't have the data that they needed in place. They didn't have a solid understanding of what business problem it was they were trying to solve. So, you know, as we mentioned, CPMAI methodology really does leverage decades old real world methodology experience for running big data projects, combined with the latest best practices. So if you're, you know, RPA, we always say it's a journey to artificial intelligence. It really helps you get your data in place. And so, you know, make sure that you have, you know, if you're doing RPA, you have RPA bots in place. That's incredible. And then as you're looking to bring in artificial intelligence, machine learning, that cognitive technology, make sure that you have a method and a methodology in place for doing so, because we've seen too much money, time, resources wasted when people try and bring in these, you know, AI projects and fail. So that's why we are such strong advocates for this.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, that wraps up the presentation. Now we are going to turn it over. We have a fireside chat with Timothy Goodwin. So welcome, Timothy. If you can get on camera, we can go ahead and get started. I'm really looking forward to this. So we've presented on, you know, the difference between attended and unattended bots, and you know, what RPA can do, what it can't do, the levels of, you know, intelligence that we can bring in, and then why methodology is so important. So we now are going to talk about RPA in practice. So I'm so excited. We have Timothy Goodwin, who's the Deputy Director, Office of Organizational Policy and Governance at USPTO. So I'd like to turn it over to you, and maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience and tell them about your role at USPTO.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kathleen. I really appreciate the invitation. My name is Timothy Goodwin. As Kathleen said, I'm Director of USPTO. Our office is responsible for really leading process improvement, quality assurance, and a lot of different automation technologies. A lot of it dealing with application developers. So we have CI/CD pipelines that we manage, maintain, and deploy. We also do test automation and, of course, RPA. Prior to that, I spent 17 years over in the FBI doing a whole bunch of data engineering, data analytics, and some vulnerability research.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. And I know that we do have a question from the audience. I had said we would hold them all until the end, but please do keep them coming and then we will make sure to get to them. So, can you talk to us about your RPA implementation at a high level that you had at USPTO, and maybe specifically, I know at a high level, but talk about what it's helping with and what kind of ROI it's delivered. And I know that return on investment can be very broad. So maybe talk about it from a people perspective, a time perspective, resource perspective.
Sure. So we started our RPA efforts about late 2019. When you take a look at like the different maturity models, we were very much a startup organization. The direction for us to look into RP actually didn't come from the bottom or the middle layers. It came directly from the director of the USPTO. And with leadership from our CIO, Jamie Holcomb, we've been able to kind of go down that path. So it was important for us that we started to take a look at what types of technologies were out there in the marketplace, and trying to understand, how are we going to apply RPA specifically to USPTO challenges. So, over that time period, we have, I would say, advanced quite significantly. From going from just like a startup organization where we had very basic practices in place of just trying to understand, what are we trying to automate, how are we trying to use RPA, we went very quickly into understanding what our strategy was and formalizing, what type of model were we going to use, whether it will be a centralized model, or going to be a federated model, or just a completely decentralized. That was actually very important for us to understand, like where we're going to go and how we're going to chart our RPA successes. So, there's some type of balancing act that needs to occur when you're looking at the different models that are out there, the technology platforms, and then trying to understand your strategic goals, what you're trying to accomplish. They all kind of go hand in hand, and especially in the early days when you're trying to look at what those ROIs are. If you're trying to get buy-in to an organization, which even though we had leadership telling us to look into this area, you still have to have business value in order to deliver on that technology platform. So, like I would think most organizations, we started off small. We want to be able to do various proof of concepts to make sure that we were doing the right types of automations. We were looking for quick wins and things of that nature that were going to help strengthen the validity of RPA. RPA was already fairly mature as a technology platform. And of course, different types of BPN type business process reengineering activities have been taking place for decades. So this is nothing new to the world. But for some reason, I really like your guys' presentation there, where you're talking about the breakdowns of RPA and repeatable processes and task processes. We kind of went through that journey ourselves and trying to understand, where are we going to try to get out of this? Initially, some of our RI was tied directly to what makes sense. What's the investment cost we're putting into this, and what are we getting out of it? Whether it be in tangible dollars, and quite honestly, initially, very early on, that was the focus. There was I would say, a misconception that by implementing ROI, you can get actually tangible dollars back into the organization's pockets that you can reapply to another technology platform or another technology solution. What we did is we worked very hard to understand the value of ROI is really in the efficiencies gained from employees, and not necessarily solely on just tangible dollars going back into the organization. Actually, we've rarely found that that has actually been applied in a lot of our automation. So we're looking at the efficiencies gained. We're looking at how many hours that can be saved for employees to be able to do better quality work. That was a key indicator driving the perceived value of RPA is how much is it helping, one, an employee, two, an employee group, and then three, the organization achieve its strategic business objectives. And we've evolved over time to grow even into more areas. What we're looking at now is trying to get beyond just the hours saved, but look at better data quality. We want to make sure that we're increasing quality standards for some of the processes that we have, some of the data that we're using, and some of the methodologies that we're actually adopting that can be standardized. We've had various process reengineering activities that have taken place on paper. And one of the things that we're striving towards is to put all those different various process reengineering activities into the applications themselves. So just what you and Ron were just talking about there, that's vital. And or for us to like achieve and go forward, it is always mind-numbing to me to see process reengineering done on paper when you can easily plug it into an application and it's there, it's repeatable, it's shareable, people can build off of those, and all your configurations and your logic is right there that can be used, and you can actually demonstrate value immediately to an end user by just flipping a bit here or there.
Exactly. And I like how you brought up, you have to get buy-in. And so you want to start with some of those immediate wins. We always say that too, no matter what project you're doing, don't start with the hardest problem, because why? Even if it just don't, you want to start small, like we said, so that you get a win, you make sure that you get people excited, you can get buy-in, you show how it has immediate impact, and then continue to move forward. Also get some practice under your belt too. You don't want to start with the hardest project, have it fail, and then be like, well, we just can't do RPA. It's like, no, yes, you can. Just, don't take on such a challenging project, or break it down into smaller chunks. So I like that you said that. Now, when you're looking to start your bot and projects in general, but really specifically for that, how do you identify which problem area or areas to start with?
Yeah, this has been a journey for us. Like I said just a little while ago, we did a first in, first out, mostly because we're gauging interest within the agency. We're trying to market and educate all in the same breath to various end users and customers that really had no idea what RPA can do for you. So, it's kind of like this weird Texas two-step where you're going through and dancing, marketing a technology platform, demonstrating some capability, but then you're also trying to get interest at the same time. So you're looking for, basically just anybody that's going to come to the table and have a conversation with you. And that works when you're doing your initial evaluations, but we've grown since then. And, part of that is through our intake process, understanding and maturing that intake process and understanding like, what are the right questions to ask? So we've gone through and created like a Power BI type application that helps the organization kind of filter that out. It's going through and trying to understand and asking some very basic questions to try to really get to the understanding of what's the value of this automation, what's the potential for it to be automated for something like RPA, because not everything, as we all know, is suited for RPA. If I could go through and create, a power automation and get the same job done, I can go through and do that. Or maybe it's more complex that requires more logic that you need to put into it that's not well suited. So we ask questions like, is this a linear process? Is it something that is subjective? Is it something that involves more than one person? Does it integrate with other systems? So we started asking some of the tactical questions just to try to get an understanding from the person who thinks that I have this really great idea for an automation, but a lot of the first in, first out type automation requests that we're receiving were just, can you help me automate my Excel spreadsheet to do function A to function B, basically an Excel macro to help them do something, or generate a report where it would impact one person and maybe that's it, maybe a few hours saved. Well, as we start to evolve, we needed to see more tie-in to our business objectives. So we also need to see a better impact, not necessarily always on the time savings, but we need to be able to see that there's a tangible business value being delivered back to the agency. So we started to align them to where we're looking at business units and starting to look at business objectives. And one of the things that we did is during the pandemic, initially in the first early months that we had this kind of lull in trademark applications. It was a lot of uncertainty that was going on in the world, and there was a lot of unknowns that were going to happen with the trademark world and over in the patent world with inventions. But after that initial formative period, we started to see a flood of trademark applications come in. I mean, a massive amount of trademark applications come in, because as people are sitting back, they're seeing opportunities here. And so the filings went up quite a bit, and that created an issue for the agency to make sure that we're being responsive to our customers and we're able to flush through those backlogs as much as we can. So we took one of those critical problem areas and we saw sought out how can RPA be applied to help with certain areas. It's not going to solve that whole problem because that's one of those big complex problems that you're not going to use RPA to solve it. But you look for wins that can help contribute to solving the overall problem. So one of those activities was doing one of those very manual activities that checks an application that comes in, it's in a suspended state or not, and then the person has to go through and click on either puts it back into a state or not. It's interactive for the user. It's something that could be automated, and it was something that we could do it with the Untitled pod, which even showed greater value because now we're doing it all the time. That has gotten such great traction in our organization, even fairly recently, that those types of automations where we see a direct correlation to the business value are the ones that we're trying to propagate towards. We're trying to glean towards those a little bit more. And we're going to continue to evolve like everybody does.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I always like to see how different agencies, organizations, even small groups are applying automation to various processes, helping to make things more efficient, helping to move forward. You know, you don't have the ability to hire up lots of new people suddenly because you get all of these new applications. So what do? How do you make do with the resources that you have? So I always like to see how people are doing that. Now, you know, with any project, I think that there's always a little bit of pain as you're going through it, lessons learned, maybe things that you could have done better, maybe things that you did really well that you'd like to share and say, you know, people should do this going forward. So what are some of the best practices and lessons learned that you've shared and that you can share with the audience for RPA projects, maybe so that they don't struggle as much at the beginning, or they can take some of those, you know, little nuggets that you got?
Yeah, I'll keep them all to myself, and you know, we'll just keep getting better and let everybody else fend for themselves. But no, there's a lot of work there, and there's always going to be lessons learned. I mean, we experience a lot of challenges along our path, and we're projecting that we're going to continue to see some of those challenges. But I think that how we're responding to those challenges has changed greatly. You know, so some of the things that we did right from the very beginning is that we created the intake process to evaluate which automations are going to be useful. So we could kind of really narrow it down. It wasn't just a total free-for-all. It was first in, first out initially, but we still had a process to go through and kind of vet these and set up a mechanism to engage with our end users and the customers that were interested in it. We also went through and established our community of practice fairly early on. And we started to have discussions about it. We try to make information available, broadly available, so people can always reference it and look at basically what's growing. To include training materials and try and get people interested out there. Where there's free training opportunities, we posted those, and we were trying to be advocates for people to go through and take it, whether they're from the business side of the house or they're actually somebody that was interested in developing an RPA bot. Some of the things that we also looked at that I think that we probably could have done a little bit better was understanding what our model was going to be and how the technology platform was going to fit that purpose. We had a really strong idea about what we want to do, especially with a federated development model and a federated deployment model. But the initial buy with our platform and the enterprise services that went along with it probably didn't quite scale the way that we wanted it to. And so this is a little bit of give and take. And it's a challenging thing to wrap your arms around, especially with the cost of an enterprise platform and understanding what you're trying to buy versus what you're evaluating and what you're trying to get out of initially. Some things that you need to be able to do is make sure that your technology platform, wherever you choose, is scalable and it meets your objectives, what you're trying to accomplish. You don't want to be fixed into any one solution. There's a lot of different automations that can be complementary to each other that can help get you there. You also want to make sure that you have the right staff that can help implement those technology platforms for the model that you choose. If you're doing like we did, a federated development model, you need to be able to go through and support various services to enable those system developers or other folks out there who are really going to be consuming those services to understand, you know, how can you make their job easier to develop bots? So what resources, what guardrails, what information can you make available to them? How are you helping them get to achieve their goals? and how can you help curtail some of their own potential issues. Some of the things that I think that we also could have done better is we underestimated the impact of security. Security is a challenge. We today do have a conditional ATO for our platform, and we do have some solutions for unattended bots, but credentialing and credentialing management and understand the boundaries of how you're going to deploy your applications and your automations with various applications. Bring security in early. If you haven't done it yet, if you're just evaluating, start having discussions with them, because it is actually a vital part, and it can actually delay a lot of your implementations down the road. You may be ready to go on like all the process side of the house. You may have your platform ready to go. You may have your customer engagement, but guess what? If you haven't really thought through and had buy-in from your CISO and other security personnel, and they're read in all along the way, you may delay your whole automation efforts by another year. You may be in a pilot phase for a very long time. So those are a few. I know we're limited on time, so I'll just kind of leave you with that. Hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly helpful. That's why you have to think through your entire process, right? Where, one area, security, where you're like, okay, I mean, yes, it's important, but how important is it? And you're like, it can delay a project by a year. That's how important it is. Make sure that you have that in place before you get started. Otherwise, you're going to delay that project, which means that, all that time and money and effort, resources, people, excitement that you got over it is going to fall by the wayside. And then a year from now, hope that that process is the same. Hope it hasn't changed that much so you can still use your bot.
and I would imagine, say, that's probably going to change many times during that process. So.
I'm sure. I don't know for in a year anything that's that static. So, we always talk about automation as a journey and a pathway to artificial intelligence. And during the presentation, we had said, automation is not intelligence, but you can bring different levels of intelligence in. So how are you viewing automation as a pathway to AI and ML?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, you can't achieve your AI and ML goals if it's on your roadmap or your radar, if you're not incorporating automation. I mean, they go hand in hand if they have to. So a lot of things we've already talked about here is just standardization of those processes. These paper-based processes, or ideas that's in somebody's head, or somebody's doing something 5 different ways and 5 other people are doing that same thing 5 other different ways. It becomes really challenging to understand. So, some organizations and agencies may not have all the right information to go through, or the environments to go through and set up their AI and ML architectures or models the way that they would want to. And a lot of it's because they just don't have a lot of the insights into the data that is already there. So one of the ways that we're looking at this is trying to grow within, we've switched over to Agile methodology, and we're supporting product teams now. So we have a data analytics product team that's focused solely around this area. They're led through our chief financial office. And, so the data that's really rich and valuable to the organization to understand, better insights, and layering that on top of our existing data warehouses and data lakes, and be able to try to leverage RPA to be able to automate some of those actions that are the back office type systems, the back office type mechanisms that are in place that can help enrich that data or make it better quality. If you have poor quality data, you're probably not going to get necessarily all the right modeling that you want to be done. It's going to take a lot of training in your AI and ML markets. Plus, it also helps with educating our workforce. A lot of people are kind of scared, well, as you said earlier, you and Ron, they're scared of like RPA. They don't know what robots are. They have all these different preconceptions about it. Same thing is true for AI and ML, probably to the 10th degree higher. So it's a way for us to introduce technologies that are enabling end users. I mean, actual end users that can have hands-on experience with it to give them a controlled mechanism into that world. Now, we're still very early on in our arc with RPA to AI and ML. We've already introduced AI independently to RPA. We have some really strong AI efforts within the organization. But one of my goals here is to help leverage RPA into that AI and ML arc, that we get there. It's really interesting to see the data, see the processes, and see the opportunities are there. And especially when people are looking at these processes and they don't quite understand, what's there. A lot of it to the vast majority of end users, these are just abstract features. They need some hand holding and they need somebody to show them what's there. We're starting with just RPA in a lot of instances to the end user, but what we want to be able to show them is how this process can actually be reimagined, and then it can be applied into these new tools that are available into the marketplace. And this is how we can leverage this a little bit more. And then it becomes that light bulb. It goes off and people start to understand, oh my gosh, I have something really powerful here. I can use this to actually not just help me do some report writing or do some basic task type management type stuff, but I can actually use this to increase our business value, to increase the services that we're offering as an agency. So we're on our journey. It's going to be a long journey, but we are there, and it is something that we're excited to go down.
That's great. We always say too, people have fears and concerns over transformative technology, and you need to make sure that you're addressing those, because some of them can be rational, but some of them are just irrational. And it doesn't mean that, you should just ignore them and move on. You need to make sure that you're addressing them and show people how you are not taking away their jobs. You're not trying to replace them with a robot, but you're just trying to have them do their jobs better and do what you really hired them for. Use their knowledge and their skill set to do their job. So this was really incredible. Thank you so much, Timothy, for this incredible chat. And Ron, thank you for putting the links in the chat. So everybody, if you'd like to see something, we put the 7 patterns of AI. We also put the CPMAI methodology overview, so you can read that in greater detail. And then we also put the Forbes article that we did recently with Timothy published in there as well. So I definitely encourage you to check them all out. Now, we do have some questions from the audience, so thank you, and we're going to get to those. If anybody has questions, please type them in. We have a few more minutes, so we'll definitely be able to get to them. The first question is, from a more business lens, how do you navigate a situation where automation can be clearly achieved and has impact and have an impact, but from a cost of implementation perspective, it may be much more than what the current cost is?
Okay.
Yes, we'll have Ron go first.
I'll start with that, and Timothy would love to get your feedback on this as well. I'll talk about maybe more generally, and maybe Timothy, you could talk about it from your perspective at USPTO. But obviously, there needs to be some ROI. I mean, automating things for automation's sake, especially since there is a cost, probably is not a good idea. There needs to be some desired outcome. Every methodology that you use, whether it's Agile or CRISP or CPMAI, the first thing is, what is the business objective? And you're supposed to be defining, at least even for the short-term ones, some tangible outcome. It might be hours saved. It might be costs saved. It might be even things that are not perhaps a, say, bottom line impact. It might be increased reliability, because people make mistakes. Even if you have a bot that literally does the same thing a person does and maybe doesn't even save that much time, but it increases your reliability by a large factor. If there's a big downside to being wrong there, then that could have some impact. It could even be security things, compliance things. We've seen a lot of bots that they just provide, they document things that are not being documented, but that have to be documented from a regulatory compliance perspective. And it's usually somebody's task. And they're like, oh, don't forget to do this and put this in the log and do that. People forget, or they go on vacation, whatever. Even if the bot is incrementally adding a cost there, because perhaps there wasn't a cost before, the increase of compliance basically reduces a risk. You have some cost associated with the risk. So there's many ways of thinking about it. Our automation cost might exceed your human labor cost. It's possible. Many times people have outsourced or automated something by having a person do that. And they might say, well, wait a second, my human labor cost is lower, perhaps, than my software automation cost, maybe in the short term, maybe even over the long term. And so you have to weigh, it's like, well, is the human labor providing what you need, the right levels of quality, turnaround time, all this sort of stuff, or is there some benefit to the software automation. So I think there's actually a lot of ways of looking at it. Obviously, you can't have negative ROI, and
Yeah.
you should have some positive return. And also, you shouldn't be doing automation for automation's sake, because that's just look. I used to have a full head of hair, right? It's gone, right? Timothy too. Look at us. See?
Yeah.
So go ahead, Timothy.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, Ryan, I really do like your answer, because like we experience a lot of those things. My initial gut reaction is to say that, take a look at the automation that they're asking for. If it's something that is a person that wants to automate, an Excel spreadsheet, and it has very little value to the business, and it's very little value to the employee or the cost of where the seat license are for the infrastructure, then I think that you need to probably say this probably isn't a good candidate for RPA from the business side of the house. There is an investment cost that goes there, but that doesn't mean you should turn away that end user either. There's a lot of different ways to automate capabilities. So that's one of the things that we look at. We don't just look at an automation potential from one solution. We actually created a toolkit, tool chest, however you want to call it, through automation capabilities, and see if we can find something that fits, or try to find something that actually we can empower like the end user there to get some training or to do something else themselves. There is, in my mind, two different categories here. If you're saving efficiency, saving dollars, and on the other side, if you're adding immediate value to the business. So you may pay for that seat license for an end user, but if the activities that they're performing significantly impacts the business side of the house, so if it's a financial system, that's something that must occur, something that must be there, you're not looking at the ROI on the number of hours saved for that individual. You're looking at the business impact to the organization. And so, even though it may be a minor dependency that this end user, the task that they're providing may be a dependency that's there, you can eliminate that. You're looking at the cost of the seat and the number of hours saved. That may not be the right metric. Make sure you're choosing your right metrics to empower the business decisions that are going to be driving from that.
That's great. So the next question that we have has to talk about applications in RPA. Are there any applications in the RPA sphere that you guys really like? Maybe you can share an example. And then there's a few, different tools that are out there, companies as well. Do you have any comments on different platforms and, maybe when users are looking at one versus another, what have you done to evaluate that? So Timothy, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'll start off with the platform side of the house. There's a lot of different platforms that are out there. I would say that there's no shortage, but there's different qualities of platforms. And I think it's really important to understand, what your objectives are, because there's different models that can kind of go through. And, when you're looking at, basically a product feature side, you want to take a look at, some of the strengths that it has from a process modeling perspective. How can it help you create your processes within the applications itself? Or how can you make sure you're not just keeping that data siloed in that application? So what's the flexibility on that? What, of course, are just the nitnoid nuts and bolts of the automations themselves? Do they support attended bots, unattended bots? What type of integrations do they offer out of the box? What type of triggers do they have that can help create templates for other automations? Repeatable processes and automation should go hand in hand. You should be creating anything independently. I think also on the feature side, you want to look at operations. What type of business value and insights does the platform give you? How is it helping you understand your goals that you're achieving? How can it help calculate some of those ROIs within the platform itself? Other things that are also equally important, security, I've already talked about that. Understanding like how the technology platform integrates security, how does it work within your model? The platform and which environment you're going to be, if it's going to be on-premise, if it's going to be a cloud, if it's going to be a hybrid. Those are all very, very important questions you have to ask for yourself and try to evaluate. I think some of the applications, there's quite a few applications that are out there that are repeatable and shared, and there's a growing community that's throwing a lot of these applications out. Some of our applications that I think that we like that are shareable to like other agencies, and we're already in discussions with that, are helping with POAMs when we're going through authority to operate or vulnerabilities within systems. So there's a reporting system that you have to log into, a DHS and put all this information in. Just logging into that system takes 5 minutes because it has so many different chips. And so, we can go through and automate that whole report or post report or post our instances that are up there. And that's something that is shareable across every agency. So there's OPM actually has a GitHub library that's out there, which is very useful. A lot of them are focused around HR activities, a lot of them focused around chief financial officer type activities, so budgeting and accounting, acquisition management, stuff like that. It makes it a little bit easier if you're using universal systems like Momentum or other stuff like that. As far as like the specific vendors that are out there, I'm going to shy away from that just because I'm not going to endorse any one particular solution over another. But I will say that it is important that you don't paint yourself into a box. So you should be looking at flexibility within the platforms and making sure that what you are trying to achieve is easily integratable with other solutions.
Excellent. That's a fantastic answer. I think the only thing I would add to that is for those who are looking at the solution space, here, because as Timothy mentioned, there are quite a healthy number of vendors in the space and some very sizable companies too. So you have startups in the space, but this is becoming a very well-developed market. Something that we track, by the way, is Cognilytica. We spend about half of our time tracking the market. We do have market intelligence in this space, over 20,000 vendors, not all in the RPA space. I think in the RPA space, I think we're going to look, we're at several dozen, probably you're looking at here. And from a feature set comparison, they're all providing some really robust features. The one thing I would like to add to that is to look at sort of the non-technology costs, because there are many around process development and process iteration, process management, process operation, dealing with the non-process parts, dealing with the data. You might have bad data preparation and cleansing. It sometimes takes up 80% of the time. Actually, I think we all have experience with that. It takes up the majority of the time. That might not be factored into your cost estimate. You might be thinking about the bot, but to get the bot operational, that's step 4, right? Phase 4 in the methodology. You still got to do phase 2 and 3, figure out what data you need and what quality it's in, and then fix it. And those costs might be significant. So I just, this is part of that total cost of ownership, really think about that. There haven't been a lot of studies in RPA TCO, maybe something that we'll take a look at, but I just encourage to add to that bit.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. And that brings us up at the hour. So this was, really incredible. Again, Timothy, we want to thank you so much for joining us in this chat and then with the Q&A from the audience. And I definitely encourage you to check out those links, like we said. But with this, I will now turn it over to Nicole.
Well, no, that was it. Thank you everyone for joining. That was an awesome webinar. Thank you all for your presentation and your conversation. And hopefully I get to see all of you guys in a future webinar. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.